Hey people. So I spent probably 45 minutes before just starting this recording doing research on specific players within the Chicago Bulls because that's who I want to talk about today. And I found myself kind of um, it's very difficult to form an opinion on basically a brand new team, if that makes sense. It's different if let's say hypothetically the Bulls only add Lonzo Ball. That's something you can kind of wrap your head around, right? It's look, here was the team last year. Let's look at the stats. Let's look at the possessions. Let's kind of see where Lonzo will wedge himself within, how this team is developed. That becomes really difficult when we didn't really get to see the team last year as it was constructed really hit their stride. They signed Vooch right before the All-Star break, and then Zach LaVine was out for a while. So it's difficult in the middle of a season to kind of reimagine a team by adding a big all-star and cutting several pieces kind of in that transaction. But then it's even more difficult when you don't get to see them play together. And then it becomes compoundingly difficult when you add several players that are going to be key options for you moving forward. So anybody's opinion on the Bulls, kind of the general consensus is that they're going to be a 4 to 6 seed in the East. Maybe more, maybe less. Who knows? That's kind of everyone's take because like anything anyone says is completely hypothetical at this point. It's a complete guess. We haven't seen this team all together. So who even knows? All that being said, I dashed my plan to talk about how DeMar DeRozan fits in with this team. And I was going to talk about his stats and his 6.9 assists, which was a career high for him last year. That's the piece of my research that's still making it into this because I thought that was very impressive. When you add Lonzo, when you add DeMar, when you even add people like Caruso, who's going to kind of change the composition of your team, when you're losing Lauri Markkanen, which it seems like all reports are that he's going to be going somewhere. The Celtics have interest, the Mavericks have interest. If he goes to either of those teams, I'm very excited for them and I'm very excited for him because Lauri is looking for a new spot within the NBA. That's what he's said publicly. But I wish him the best because I really like Lauri coming out. I really liked when we drafted him. I really like his game to this day. I just don't know where he fits within the composition of this team going forward. All of that being said, I think it's a better idea just to talk about just my general thoughts on the Bulls instead of having a bulleted kind of regimented. Let's talk about it from this point of view. I know a lot of people probably want to start with Lonzo, but I want to start with DeMar. I really, really love DeMar DeRozan. I really loved him in Toronto. I really loved him in San Antonio. They kind of built their whole composition and their whole team around DeMar in many ways. He was the savvy veteran on that Spurs team that has a lot of young talent. I was really surprised to see that he was their top scorer last year by a pretty wide margin. I think he scored like 22 points per game, and the next closest was like Derek White or DeJounte Murray or somebody at like 14, which is crazy to see. I just thought that there was more scoring there, but when you really think about it, it makes sense that there's not because San Antonio, if it was any other team, if you took that whole roster and just slapped the Orlando Magic name on them, you'd be like, wow, that team kind of sucks. But somehow Pop and the Spurs culture and DeMar and Patty Mills kind of righted that ship and they almost made the playoffs. But anyways, this is how my videos get to be 45 minutes when I want them to be 10 minutes. But yeah, DeMar, I really, really like the fit for him. We're coming into his 13th season, and I think he's really hungry to prove people wrong. And I like that he's coming into a situation that has 3-point shooting around him, and it doesn't need to be him because he's an atrocious 3-point shooter. He shot, I'm trying to recall, I was looking at basketball reference earlier. He shot certainly under 2 3-pointers per game, or at least made less than like one per game. And it was on like 26% shooting. Not very good. Not very good at all. But this Bulls team has Zach LaVine, who is a very, very, very good shooter. This team has Kobe White, who is not Zach LaVine, but he's a good 3-point shooter, I think, especially when they're wide open. Vooch can shoot. Vooch can stretch the floor. Lonzo can shoot. Caruso can shoot, kind of. This is a team that's going to have a good bit of shooting, which is exciting to put that around DeMar. Also, Lonzo is like what a great. Everybody knows that Lonzo is kind of the longest running hypothetical trade in the NBA. I've been hearing about Lonzo to Chicago for the last 3 seasons, I think. And to see it finally happen, it's this weird spot as a Bulls fan where it's like this fever dream of we knew that this would maybe happen eventually, but at the same time, it took so long to get to this point that it almost didn't even feel real when it happened. I've seen so many photos of Lonzo in a Bulls jersey that I'm sure all the pages that post those on Instagram just got to reuse their photos that they made from 2 seasons ago of him in a Bulls jersey. But I really like the addition. He's an injection of young talent. He's going to be starting alongside Levine. We have somebody who can really handle the ball at a high clip and can distribute the ball at a high clip. It really, really sucks to see Tomas Satoransky leave. I really, really liked him as a player, but I liked him a lot less as a primary ball handler, and that's what the Bulls seem to use him a lot as. He's 6'7". It's just tough to have a dude like that kind of be the primary ball handler for your team unless you're like a point forward, which he's just not. So Lonzo next to Zach LaVine is really, really exciting. DeMar is going to be in that starting group. I would assume we're going to be rounding it out with Vooch and Patrick Williams. It's interesting to see, fascinating to see that everybody has kind of sharpied the Bulls into that 4 to 6 slot, and there's still so many unknown factors. I think everybody is basing that 4 to 6 on what the Bulls looked like last year, which I don't think is a fair representation of what the team was, just because of what I talked about earlier. Zach LaVine was out for an extended period of time. As soon as they brought in Vooch is trying to completely find himself within a new system, which is not what he was used as in Orlando. Vooch was the all roads led through Vooch in Orlando. He did not have a lot of options around himself as far as creating offense. I guess you want to say Terrence Ross, but Zach LaVine is certainly a much improved player over Terrence Ross, and they utilized him that way. It would be a lot different if Vooch was in Orlando and Terrence Ross was handling the lion's share of ball handling and scoring. It was the exact opposite. Vooch was coming into a situation where his role was being completely diminished, not completely diminished, but certainly rearranged by being on a team with Zach LaVine, who is kind of a Swiss Army knife for the Bulls as far as offense goes. So we didn't really get to see that cohesion, which would have been difficult to set up after the All-Star break anyways. And then with the injuries and then with them adding all of these players, it's all just guessing. And there's still unknowns even past that. What is Patrick Williams going to look like this season? What is Kobe White going to look like when he has a much more specific role, which is kind of think Jordan Clarkson, think Lou Williams, really, really burn some second units, especially with his court mate on that second unit of guards being Alex Caruso. I mean, off the top of my head, not even trying to be a homer as a Bulls fan, I think that's probably the best guard combo off your bench in the NBA. It's also weird to see the Bulls have a team of a bunch of actual players spending so many years in kind of basketball obscurity, in purgatory, if you will, this kind of the same thing that the Orlando Magic do. We are always just under the mix. You're never terrible to try and get better. You're never pushing all the cards in to try and be really, really good. You're always just kind of middling around the bottom middle of the East and not really going anywhere, really treading water. So to see the Bulls push all the pieces in is strange and exciting and scary all at once, because this is kind of the team. And of course, that comes with the caveat of everybody's like, oh, this is the team. They signed DeMar to this big deal. They signed Lonzo to this big deal. Zach LaVine's going to get an extension. They have Vooch. This is the team. We've found in basically every situation over the last couple of years that no team is ever the team. Any contract is tradable. Moves are always makeable, whether they're good or not. But that's a whole other topic. So the whole idea of like, this is your team for 3 years, it's like, yeah, but that can change. It's not like we have shackled ourselves to this being the composition of players. And if it doesn't work out, it's like, well, run it back. Well, there's options. Okay. But that's the fearful side. There's also the excited. portion of this, which is the Bulls might actually be back. And I'm not yelling the Bulls are back, baby, in the same way that like Trey Kirby from No Dunks is, but I have that voice kind of deep in my soul that's just waiting for some more data points to let me know that I should really be feeling that. So I was listening to DeMar DeRozan did kind of an introductory press conference. It wasn't a formal press conference, the one that I listened to, but it was more of him just zooming with a lot of Chicago media members and them kind of asking him questions. And somebody asked a question about how does he feel like he fits with this team, the composition of this team. Maybe I'll add a composition counter to this video. I feel like I've said the word composition about 60 times so far. But he was talking about how he fits in with the pieces that are on this team and the roster as it's presently constructed. And he had an interesting answer. He said that construction of the team and team cohesiveness and how the pieces fit together doesn't really matter as long as everybody comes in with a winning mentality that kind of supersedes the construction. And I feel like that's true and also not true. It's nuanced, but he's an NBA player with 13 years of experience. So let's let's assume that he's correct and let's kind of dig into that a little bit. The first part of that is, does a winning mentality matter? I think it does. It's something that Phil Jackson talks a lot about in his book, 11 Rings. Is that what it's called? Kind of everybody has to buy in order for a championship to occur, to even be in kind of title contention. You all have to kind of buy in, make sacrifices. That's a big point in athletics in general, but it also seems to also resonate with NBA players and teams too. So from that standpoint, I think he's correct. Now, the natural follow-up to that is, do the Bulls have that? I think that Lonzo certainly has a lot to prove. He has had a very interesting road to this point. I feel like Lonzo's 30 years old, but he's actually like 24. I feel like he's just been in the league, in the spotlight as a talking head, mostly because of his father and his family. He's aging like a president. Like I just feel like he's been in the NBA for so long. But he's still a really young player who's looking to prove himself, to find himself in a new situation. He was in a weird spot in LA just because he had to prove himself as the number 2 pick, and the Lakers are just, that fandom is so intense, and the players are so scrutinized within that ecosphere of just being LA and being the Lakers. And he kind of gets to reinvent the wheel on himself in New Orleans, a team that is more in the shadows, more obscure. There's not a lot of Pelicans fans, especially when you compare them to Lakers fans. So he kind of got to reinvent himself, recreate his shot. It seems like that's a consistent element of his game that he's added, which will be very welcome in Chicago. I mean, DeMar certainly feels like he has something to prove. He has a huge chip on his shoulder. So DeMar and Lonzo certainly have that. Zach LaVine certainly has that. I mean, so many people have had so many opinions and so many differing opinions on Zach LaVine for so long. Can you actually construct a winning team with Zach LaVine as the main or one of the primary options? It seems like most people would err on the side of no. He's kind of in that same Bradley Beal conversation and context where it's like, if he's your best player, can you win a championship? So Zach LaVine certainly has a chip. Vooch is a little more of an unknown, but I don't see why he wouldn't. I mean, this was a big move for him, getting out of the situation in Orlando that they've basically been the team that they've been and relied on him the same way for years and years and years. So to be able to be a focal point of a massive trade to go to Chicago, a team that has high expectations of you and your game and what you can bring, all of those guys have a chip. Caruso certainly brings that. He won a title with the Lakers, right? I mean, if anybody, what sacrifices need to be made, what contributes mentally and physically and in a locker room to winning basketball. I mean, Caruso is just such a great addition. I understand why he isn't talked about in the same way that the Lonzo signing or the DeMar signing are, just because he's certainly the third most important player out of the three. But man, I love Alex Caruso, but really, really excited to have him on the team too. The other side of the coin on DeMar's question is, you don't really need to have cohesion, and you don't need to have pieces that make sense together if everybody buys into a winning mentality. I think this team is certainly going to buy into a winning mentality, but the other side is, does this team not make sense together? I don't see how that's true. You now have a primary ball handler. Kobe White was not that. We finally have a primary ball handler in Lonzo Ball, which we did not really have last year at a high level. You have Zach LaVine, who can score and shoot the ball at a really high level. You have DeMar, who is a veteran presence on this team, who distributed the ball incredibly well last year, has a great mid-range game. You can give him the ball and he can generate a bucket for himself, which is very, very rare in the NBA. Then you have Vucevic, who I'm a huge fan of his game. He's the kind of a hybrid, traditional center with some stretch added to his game. He's kind of what you wish Brooke Lopez was in a lot of ways. So I think this team has a lot of cohesion. I think the bigger factor in their success is not what their team is, but what other teams are. The Bulls are not limited by the Bulls roster, but they are kind of stymied. There's hurdles to overcome with the Brooklyn Nets being in your conference, with the Milwaukee Bucks being in your conference, with a lot of teams at around your level also being in the Eastern Conference. Celtics, Hawks, Heat, Knicks, maybe, Pacers, maybe. I'm sure I'm forgetting someone, but all those teams are kind of in the same realm. Is it homerish of me to say I wouldn't be surprised if they were the 3 seed? Let's look. Oh my God, I totally forgot about the Sixers. That's so funny. And I forgot about the Raptors too. I mean, see, there's just so many teams that are around that same area. I would not bet on it, but I wouldn't be blown away if the Bulls ended up being the 3 seed. Am I going to look back on this video in several months and be like, wow, that was a really stupid take when they're the 6th seed? Maybe, but that's kind of the volatility of this. Could they be the 3 seed? Yes. I'm not going to bet on it. I would be more confident betting that they're the 6th seed than I would be that they would be the 3 seed. But I also see how either option it's not a complete oddity that they would end up there. All right. Well, I'm just going to go ahead and cut this video there. I sat down with the intention of being like, you know what, Alex, I feel like your first video was too long. It actually was 45 minutes and I cut it down to, I think it was 20 minutes. And even when I was watching that back, I was like, this is too long. You need to make shorter videos. And I'm sure what I have done here is not done that. I'm sure I'm going to have to cut this down quite a bit, but I just can't shut up. So, so this is the video. But again, thank you guys for taking the time to watch this. If you did, I appreciate the people who watched, liked, and commented on my last video. So yeah, I'm going to cut this here. Thank you guys for taking the time, and I'll catch you next time.